This is another mean to increase the kind of control over the individual.
O quinto elemento voltou e nessa segunda parte da série especial de entrevistas que fizemos, o grande Arthur Machado conversa com um dos mais influentes analistas políticos do cenário contemporâneo, Ivan Timofeev. Diretor no renomado Russian International Affairs Council, Timofeev é uma das vozes mais respeitadas quando o assunto é geopolítica, diplomacia e os novos rumos da ordem internacional multipolar. Nessa entrevista ele analisa os desafios enfrentados pelos desdobramentos do conflito com a Ucrânia e fala sobre o assunto bastante atual, sanções.
Sanctions may be quite comparable with even with the use of force. In some cases they cause quite significant humanitarian losses.
Não perca uma conversa direta, franca e esclarecedora sobre um mundo em transformação com quem está no centro dos acontecimentos, aqui nos canais do Quinto Elemento.
Bem, amigos do Quinto Elemento, estamos de volta em Moscou, dessa vez para discutir, conversar sobre geopolítica, sanções, com Ivan Timofeev. Ele é diretor-geral de Assuntos Internacionais do Conselho Russo. E vamos conversar sobre sanções. Thank you so much for your time, Ivan. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate. The first question that I'd like to discuss with you and a little bit is about, of course, sanctions as part of our conversation today. Unfortunately, globally, sanctions, everything was weaponized recently. It's not only because of the conflict, but it looks like that since the last 10 years, slowly but surely, many aspects of life are weaponized. Money, food, energy, even the history, education, also weaponized. But at the same time, we understand that, the sanctions has some clear goals in the financial sector. When you extend this for other areas like health, companies, industries, these start to create some humanitarian issues like health assistance or equipment. And some specialists think that also sanctions could produce some humanitarian and also disease or humanitarian concerns. How you see that? Is sanctions today also create not only geopolitical issues but humanitarian issues through many countries?
Well, sanctions are a part of foreign policy toolbox, and quite often they are combined with other instruments like diplomacy or the use of military force, or the use of military aid. This is what we see in the case of Ukrainian conflict, when not just sanctions are used against Russia, but this is also an extensive military aid provided to Ukraine, intelligence aid, and many other for financial support. So sanctions is just one of the means, though. You're right that they are increasingly implemented in contemporary foreign policy, especially by the U.S. The U.S. is trying to, let's say, to utilize its leadership in the international financial system, in the system of global supply chains, technological chains, and by now they can actually do this, trying to pursue their foreign policy goals and national interests. And so the military aspect is there in a sense that sanctions may be used, may be implemented in combinations with the use of military force or in special operations and things like this, right? So with the use of force. In terms of damage to the economy, to the civil societies, sanctions may be quite comparable with even with the use of force. In some cases, they cause quite significant humanitarian losses. I would refer to quite to two examples. One is quite recent. Another one is is more remote in terms of time. The one is Iraq. The first is Iraq in 1991, when sanctions and the blockade determined the increase of infant mortality and children mortality and other negative consequences for the society. The most recent example is COVID, when countries under sanctions, they still were confined in terms of their access to payment mechanisms to normally get the important medical equipment, despite the existing exemptions on humanitarian transactions. Still, the overcompliance of business, the fear of the secondary sanctions and enforcement determined cautiousness of business in provision of goods and services, even in medical and humanitarian spheres. And it's pretty hard to count the exact level of human losses aggravated by sanctions during COVID, but it is clear that sanctions for sure didn't help. They accelerated, they exacerbated the existing problems. So here are some examples of what we call militarization of sanctions, or in a way the comparison between sanctions and the use of force.
This on top of that, it's funny because I have read actually one article that actually wasn't a book regarding the sanctions that Trump made to Iran in 2019, 2018, right? That's a kind of a maximum pressure policy that he utilized. And at that time, I read an interview of foreign minister of the Iran,
Zarif. Mr. Zarif.
Yeah, and he said that, okay, now what's happening with this kind of sanctions? They are helping us to develop new technologies to bypass the sanctions. So instead of creating, of course, they create issues in one side, the other side, they are helping to create alternatives and create newer technologies, and maybe forcing the countries to create new agreements and new markets exactly to bypass this situation. And on top of that, how efficient, really efficient sanctions are in terms of really be able to pressure, make a geopolitical pressure in the country, and not take the opposite effect, like help the country to find new solutions, new routes to be independent of the current market structure.
Well, on the one hand, sanctions indeed may stimulate the progress of the local industries, of the industries and technologies in a target state. And the case of Iran is quite illustrative. Iran managed to create some industries quite successfully. It's rocket science, research in the production of missiles, of rockets, of engines, their industry, the automobile industry, the production of unmanned aerial vehicles, and a number of other spheres are provide quite an interesting and if not fascinating examples of progress under significant economic pressure. However, what is clear, and if you look at the numbers, at the economic statistics of Iran, and if you talk to Iranian people, to the businesses in Iran, it's clear that sanctions inflict damage. It's clear. In all cases, this is not just the case of Iran. This is also the case of Russia, the case of any other country under sanctions, right? So it's crystal clear that sanctions are distorting normal market relations. They cause damage. They inflict economic losses. They increase outlays. And yes, you're right. It's possible to have some gray schemes, shadow schemes to bypass sanctions. It's doable. And Iran does this, and many other target countries like North Korea and others, Venezuela. So they do this, but this costs money. This increases outlays, and one other problem is the gray economy. If you have gray schemes to bypass sanctions, then you have gray color in the sectors which are, let's say, which are connected to these schemes, right? If you use cash in the transactions, then it's clear that you will have problems with taxation, right? If you use such schemes, it's clear that this is a good ground for corruption. If you have corruption, you can get your institutions undermined, increasing the undermined, right? It's a good environment, perfect environment for the let's say generation of what is called organized crime, and the country, a target state, has to deal with this, right? It's a problem. So on the one hand, this is a solution, but the collateral damages may be quite painful. Still, what is also important that sanctions are usually do not force a target states to change their political course. So Iran has been reluctant for sanctions since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and the country survives under sanctions for more than 40 years. North Korea managed to get nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles despite the extensive and unprecedented sanctions by the UN and unilateral sanctions of the US and others. Russia is a fresh example when we faced sanctions tsunami by 50 countries, 50 Western countries. And so what? Yeah, the damage is there. The initiators also faced damage, right, in return. And where are the results? Russia is pursuing its foreign policy. Russia has even made its political demands more salient and more resolved. And in a number of economic spheres, the damage is huge, but the transition is also visible to different supply schemes, in many cases quite legal. We have just reoriented our trade connections on the countries which have not imposed sanctions, right? Like China, like India, etc. So, the transactions with them may be a problem for the West, and the West may call them illegal, but for us, they are completely legal, and in terms of international law, they are legal as well.
On top of that, I see and I'd like to understand your point of view, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. I see a movement that was very interesting, because we have this let's call macro sanctions that is made through the countries. But at the same time, start with this, but also have in companies as well, individuals. And this kind of control is also supported by this compliance industry that was created in the last 35 years. And it's crazy. I will open just a bracket here to tell a history that's totally unbelievable for me. A friend of mine told me that he was in Lisbon and was made a renovation of his house. And he went to the furniture store because his wife would like to buy some new furniture. And she bought one dining table, chairs, and also some new chairs for the living room. Well, the total cost of the furniture was more than 50,000 euros, but less than 20, so like something this. And when he came up to pay with a Portuguese bank, Portuguese credit card, bank account, he lived in Portugal, he is a Portuguese. The owner of the store said, "Oh, hold on, because I have to fill up one form here because we're spending more than 15,000 euros and paying by credit card." Say, okay, would you mind to fill up this for me? When he got the form, was a know your client form, anti-laundry form. He said, "Hold on, you have to tell to the state that I'm buying a dining room for my house." You must say, yes, now is a new law in the European Union. This, of course, is totally insane because, of course, you are not buying with this stuff with in cash or gold or diamonds. You are paying with a Portuguese credit card from Portuguese bank in Portugal from a Portuguese guy that has salaries and havens in Portugal. But even so, the state want to know if you want to buy this or not. In a certain way, this extension of the sanctions idea to the personal level, and they create to support all this idea, an industry, this compliance industry that accounts for around $35 billion per year in the world, considering systems, account systems, lawyers, teams, jobs, and they are taking this money out of the economy to keep it in the control industry and in a certain way control the macro life of people. So don't think that's the idea. How you see that? How this idea of sanctions is getting so extent and so deep that it start to enter in the personal life, and one day one government will sanction people in the individual level by opinions, by I don't know, religion, by country, or maybe by a political position or a comment you made through the social network. It's not, I mean, this idea is get so at the same time, so with a huge extension and so deep that we are in the wrong way create a kind of monster that will control the life of everyone in the countries.
Well, you're right. The so-called targeted sanctions, the ones which are focused on individuals or organizations, are the most demanded instrument of sanctioning in the recent 20 plus years, though they coexist with the old school export control or carpet bombing embargoes. So the good old instruments of sanctioning the countries are still exist, and they are extensively used against Russia and other targeted states. At the same time, it's true that these targeted sanctions are, or smart sanctions as they are often called, are a trend, and we see the increasing numbers of the use of this, of the implementation of the reliance on this kind of instrument, and quite often there is a temptation to consider these sanctions as something, let's say, less harmful than the sanctions vis-à-vis a country in general. At the same time, this is a mistake in many occasions. For instance, let's take an example of Venezuela. There is a monopolist producer of oil in Venezuela, which is PDVSA. This is the name of the company. And Americans sanctioned that country, that company. So formally speaking, these are targeted sanctions. So they are focused not against Venezuela. They are targeting a specific company. However, this company is of paramount importance for the economy. It's a backbone of the economy. This would mean that if you sanction this particular company, so in theory this will be a targeted sanction, but in reality this affects millions of people, right, and the whole economy. In case of Russia, if you look at the financial sector sanctions, almost all of the big banks are under severe severe blocking sanctions, right? And the impact is going far beyond these organizations. So the collateral damage, the spillover effects of these sanctions are quite significant. So they are targeted in theory. However, they may be much more harmful in reality. On the level of natural persons, individuals, the problem is of different kind. You have mentioned the necessity to fill in different forms. This is another mean to increase a kind of control over an individual, because today one may use this to control sanctions, but tomorrow this may be abused, right? And you never know when this abuse would happen. And right, compliance. On the one hand, this is direction on business to adopt to these realities. The business loves silence, and the business doesn't want to have problems with the regulators, especially with the US ones, which consider their jurisdiction in quite a wide manner. For instance, if we have a dollar transaction, then we are entering the U.S. jurisdiction, and we may be subject to civil or even criminal liability if it goes if it violates the sanctions regimes. So business tries to control the transactions in order to comply with sanctions regimes. However, the problem is that these regimes are mounting. They are getting, let's say, more and more sophisticated, more and more extensive, and quite often it's simply uneasy to comply. And on the other hand, this is an instrument of extraterritorial control. You mentioned the report of these two guys to their government. This is not the biggest problem, because this is their government. They are a part of this legal system, and they must obey to the existing law. And they can change this law by means of elections, by means of, let's say, dialogue with your authorities, the political campaigns, and whatever. However, it is an increasingly widespread and already widespread practice when the American legislation is concern number one for compliance. So this would mean that these two guys in Portugal, they would need not just to comply with the Portuguese law or the EU law, but to the US legislation, which is a foreign country, right? So this would mean that the foreign country's legislation is at least not less important than the national legislation. And this, of course, blurs the principle of national sovereignty. This is, in fact, an interference into the legal system of a foreign state.
I like very much your question. Now you put me in a difficult situation, because we opened two doors that I'd like to explore, and I'm in doubt which one to explore first. But I go for the geopolitical side, but I'd like to come back probably in the next question to the individual level. But you mentioned that this compliance law, at the end of the day, is a reference to a foreign law that's obliged the country to follow. In that way, how you see, example, Trump now. Trump said that he'd like to make easier the FCPA law around the world, because in a certain way they are creating issues for the American companies that would like to explore foreign markets. What he's trying to say is that, yes, this law was created only for the big companies, the globalist companies, the multinational companies, and create issues for the middlemen in the United States to access foreign countries because of the level of control and everything. At the same time, we have seen many cases where the FCPA was used as a good branch to be anti-corruption law. By the way, even happened in Brazil. It still happens now, because in the political side, considering that now that at least the democracy or this liberal democracy in the West, this idea that one man, one vote is not about, unfortunately, it's not about to discuss politics anymore, but it's now show business. So the most populist, the most funny guy, the guy that has a best presence in the social network, he's more likely to win an election than someone that really has really substance to discuss politics in proposed solution for the country. That's one problem in the liberal democracy. But in this scenario, anti-corruption is always good, because people say, no, we have to fight against corruption, and the middleman believes that his life is bad, not because the government took bad decisions, but someone is there stealing his assets, and should be combat this conduct. But and on the other hand, the FCPA was used many times to create reputation issues for companies and force them to be sold. And that's happening with famous cases, Alstom and GE in France, even Huawei, that was not sold, but I saw that CFO was the woman that was arrested in US in the HSBC case, something like that. That HSBC was forced to assume a fraud. We have in Brazil a huge operation that was to combat corruption. In the end of the day, just result the selling of Brazilian companies or destroying Brazilian companies, open these markets to US companies. So in that way, how you see the FCPA as a kind of, not only FCPA, but all these regulations, as a geopolitical weapon to control countries, control markets, and force them to, or keeps the companies, local companies, with certain level of influence in their markets, and if necessary, if this company becomes too big, or put in risk some hegemony of American markets or companies, they use this to create reputational attacks and force them to sell to sell their companies. How you see this? What's the limit, the ethical limit? How really these policies create benefits for the market, for the countries, and how, I mean, what's the limit that these policies have been using only as a geopolitical weapon to keep market control and under certain hands?
Well, again, this is a big question, and on the one hand, the corruption and the international corruption networks is a huge problem, and the Foreign Corruption Protection Act, while pursued, let's say, a reasonable goal pursues a reasonable goal to counteract these practices. Indeed, the United States have specific sanctions programs on corruption. This is not just about the impact on companies, but this is about visa sanctions against those who are supposed to be corrupted. Global Magnitsky Act also relates to the issue, not just to the issue of human rights, but also the so-called acts of corruption. So, in theory, these are the goals which may seem reasonable. On the other hand, in some cases, these legal mechanisms may be misused, and they can be implemented in favor of the particular players, right? So it's clear that the U.S. business is interested in the to have an access to the local markets, and any measure to protect the market is perceived as the way to undermine the principle, the open doors principle, the principle of equal competition. But in this equal competition, the US companies have an advantage. They have a leverage, and they will win by definition, killing the local producer. So in this sense, I would say that anti-corruption mechanisms themselves are not have not been designed. They were not designed to be a weapon or in the hands of American companies, but in the number of occasions they may help to, let's say, to make the market more favorable, right? So if there is a company which is kicked out from business due to anti-corruption sanctions or criminal cases or let's say charges or indictment which purport the corruption or fraud, etc., then of course you can, if you are a business, you can make a benefit on this in one way or another. I would refer to another example which you haven't mentioned, but it seems also relevant, the case of Huawei and the arrest of its financial director in Canada, Man Banzhou, who was consequently released, but she had to spend almost 3 years under the home arrest, right? And the Americans accused her of fraud, of provision of false statements to HSBC Bank. And actually, well, the case could be interpreted like this, but that was, let's say, quite an over-exaggeration, right, of the information provided by her. So that was quite a controversial case, and it was definitely perceived, including by the company, as a politicized case due to the towering competition in the telecom sector, and which was combined with trade sanctions against Huawei, its emergence in the entity list, and enforcement actions against other telecom companies in China. So yeah, I wouldn't say that sanctions is a major instrument in the hands of business to fight for the market. It's not. But business can, so the goals of sanctions are rather political, but business can, let's say, exploit them at some point and gain on them.
Don't you think that now we are living in one area that we should start to discuss sanctions globally? In terms, which terms I'm asking to you, because we have the idea that what's happening local keeps the local
Stance.
Exactly. But it's not true, because what if something happens with you local,
Right.
become globally very fast, because you go to the networks, social networks, it's easy, Google is there, and we also has this kind of systems that work for banks like WorldCheck, Lexus, and Moody's and Dow Jones.
Right.
And they pretend to be good guys and get the most precise information possible, what's not true at all, because sometimes they collect facts by Google or websites, and it's easy to put news around it. And when decision, even the legal side, was averted, and the guy was not considered not guilty. Even so, that's not important for the news. So what keeps the news is this exactly the accusation or the false claims, and this has a huge impact of the level of individuals globally. Not only because of the reputation attack, but let's assume that one guy from one country politically press a button, or a judge press a button and block you in their country. And this, considering the system today, get globally fast. So you wake up in the morning, traveling with your family, and your credit card doesn't work anymore. And you have even money to buy, water to your kids, or the most basic steps. It's not a time to globally discuss limits of sanctions at individual level. Say, look, we have to discuss limits because today this kind of stuff based on the idea of transparency and publicity becomes a huge nightmare for individuals and even for corporations, because the competitors use this against their competitors, right? And becoming a huge mass cancellation individuals and companies around the world. So the guy or the company almost suffer a civil death. It's not the time to have a real international regulation to limit the extension of this for the individual level and the corporate level as well.
Well, it's true that sanctions on the local level may have more global consequences. Let's take as an example the bans on the imports of the Russian oil to the European Union, for instance. All of these volumes had to be distributed to other markets. So we witnessed the global reconstruction, reconfiguration of the supply chains of oil. We fixed the unprecedented increase, for instance, of the Russian supplies to India, the towering supplies to China. So the local factor of sanctions against Russia caused quite significant global changes in global logic of supply chains in this sphere, right? So and there are many other examples when, for instance, a particular company is sanctioned, but it has numerous consumers worldwide. At the same time, if you take the US authorities are trying to take these global impacts into account, and quite frequently they are either providing exemptions from sanctions regimes just to diminish the global consequences of sanctions, or they are avoiding using them. I would say that the case was such a case was in 2017 when Americans adopted CATSA law, countering American adversaries through Sanctions Act, and this one of the sections of this act demanded a report on particular impacts of sanctions against Russian sovereign debt. At that time, OFAC reacted to Congress, saying that these sanctions would be harmful for, let's say, American investors. This harm would go beyond the borders of Russia, and these sanctions were postponed. So they had not been the case till 2022, till the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine. So that you're right that local shocks may cause global results, outcomes, but it's not easy to predict the global consequences, right? Because the market is non-linear, and at some point, some minor impact may cause quite a huge disaster on the market.
Yeah, I'm asking this because there's one quotation. It's in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish well, but it's funny because say like "echa la ley, echa la trampa." That means the moment you have the law is born, at the same moment the fraud comes together at the same time. So in the end of the day, I'm in doubt if when they start to create sanctions, or not only for country but also for companies, individual level, with a big extension, at a certain way, it's not an incentive for the black market, right? We create a black market because it's like this: if something is totally impossible, at the end of the day, a person, an individual, a company or a country has no other option facing this section. I mean, like I will die because of that. Of course, I will find a way to bypass and pay whatever I need to pay to survive, right? To keep me alive.
Yeah.
So I think that at the end of the day, they are getting the opposite. They are creating new technologies and solutions for the black market to bypass the number of sanctions, to bypass the law, to be successful and to keep alive. On top of that, there's one concern I'd like to hear your opinion and how you see the future. Because, of course, we have a lot of regulation and control of this compliance industry. That, for me, is part of the problem, not part of the solution at all. But at the same time, they are not increasing, but new technologies are coming and new innovations are coming. So we have this CBDC idea in Europe. They are trying to implement this in Europe, the Euro Digital, that's the central bank digital currency. In a certain way, we have this already in China. Even the Emirates, they also have the M-Bridge project. That's a payment system, but also with some digital currency. That's give a lot of power for the states to control money and payment systems. And with this integrated, and it's funny because European people is complaining against it. European is totally against it, most of them, CBDC. But of course, the European Union is not connected with people, so they don't care about what their opinion are. But on the other hand, Trump forbidden this. Trump said, this is totally forbidden, we will not launch CBDCs. But Brazil, that's underdeveloped in everything you could imagine it. In this subject, in this specific subject, will be one of the first countries in the world to launch their own CBDC. Why? But this gives you a lot of power for countries to implement sanctions and cancel money and don't allow your money with you works in different establishments. So how you see this advance of technology, mainly in the financial market, to increase the risk of create more authoritarianism and the structure to implement sanctions in a more efficient way, creating issues for individual level. And, that's also a big question, and how you see this connected with artificial intelligence around the world? Because can you imagine if the artificial intelligence work integrated with financial market with some rules that, hey, this guy here is under sanction. So all your movements could be identified by artificial intelligence and cancelled around the world. So how do you see this advance, in technology and in products, financial products, as a huge risk for countries, enterprise, and individuals?
Well, you're right, it's a big risk, and the reality of yesterday, not even today, is that we became much more transparent. And we as individuals do a lot to increase this transparency. We are posting on Facebook, on Instagram, or whatever social network. These social networks and other ecosystems, on the one hand, they increase the efficiency of marketing, of the targeting of products, of understanding the peculiarities of target audiences. But on the other hand, they of course provide much more technical opportunities to, let's say, to know about the individuals more than the individual knows about himself, right? So in this sense, we are getting more vulnerable. And again, this is a double-sided story. This sword has two edges. On the one hand, this is, for example, a tool to control corruption, right? So if transactions are more technocratic, if we use less cash, if we use banking transactions, then it's harder to be corrupted or corrupt. But on the other hand, all of the transactions are visible and they can be affected when it comes to politics, right? So it may not be about corruption, but it may be about politics. For instance, transactions with the Russian Federation. And it's not just about sanctions, it may be also about compliance. If a Russian citizen which is not sanctioned would come to a bank in Portugal and would try to open a bank account, he or she would have a problem because he or she is from Russia.
Yes.
So they will be, let's say, watched under the microscope lenses, right? Who are you? What you are, etc. And this is, of course, damages the whole idea of human rights, the whole idea of freedom, the whole idea of autonomy, and but this is the reality of yesterday. The reality of today is that this vulnerability and this visibility of a human or of an organization to whoever who has, let's say, power to control. This may be a government, this may be a company, a big company which controls the algorithm. The problem of today and tomorrow is the manipulation of the content. When you control algorithm, you can adjust it to your political goals or goals of control. And when these algorithms are controlled, let's say, adjusted not by humans but by the artificial intelligence, this may be much faster, easier, and this may have far-reaching impacts. To some extent, at some point, this would hit those who are controlling, because they are also under the control. They are also not free, right? And in terms of national security, of course, this is a big problem, huge problem for those countries which do not have their own AI technologies, which do not have their own algorithms of social networks, right? So if you don't know the algorithms of any social network, how can you feel secure in this social network, right? That is why what we see in big powers like Russia or China, we see the drift from US-led global social networks. In Russia, if you try to use Facebook, well, it's possible via VPN is fine, as I understand, but it's not easy, right? So we have a local network of Contact. Or in China, they have their own ecosystem, which is they have a firewall, and they are prohibited from using other social networks. And this may turn to be quite a trend in the international relations. But most countries cannot afford themselves to do this. They cannot. They don't have political will to prohibit Western or the US controlled social networks. What for? But if you don't have these keys from these instruments, then how can you be sure that there is no interference into the elections, for instance, or into the public opinion on other issues or whatever, right? So if you find that there are some violations, there are some interferences, how can you make the owners of the social network liable? What can you do? It's a tremendous problem.
Don't we think that BRICS, because in a certain way we are face the end of the hegemony of America to a multipolar world, or at least a theory of the great nations, the great powers. And the example, China. China, a couple of years ago, decided that they would not be only a maritime power, but also they want to be part of the group that will rule and create the rules. Not create the rules, they write the rules. So they use this maritime power to start to rewrite rules in a way that interests for their country. And this happens in different sectors. It's not the moment that BRICS, as a bloc, discuss this internally, and Russia, could be the country that could put this flag up and say, look, guys, let's propose in this multipolar world a new order, internal BRICS, to limit this kind of the effect of sanctions, at least in the individual level, in the company level, because this could really create serious problem for people that are under sanctions in different countries, or hunted by the compliance industry, or the same time the same way that there is there's a industrial military complex in the United States. I say that to have this industrial censorship complex that now is the media as well, and the social networks that produce the same propaganda, the same ideas in different channels. But it's not the time that BRICS said we have to create a new, or propose a new order for that, creating limits of effects in the individual level, like you cannot close accounts for any reason. We have to create at least the chance of present a defense or explain the situation in a formal way. Because today banks just, if they don't like you, if they saw or see some bad news or attack against you in the internet or Google, they just close your accounts with no explanations, no questions asked, and no explanation at all. It's not the moment to start this discussion. If United States, Europe are not interested in go deeper on this issue, it's not the moment for BRICS to start to discuss this, and maybe with Russian leadership to propose some new rule on this.
Well, BRICS is a good mechanism to discuss the issue, and indeed BRICS addressed a number of problems connected to the ones we are now discussing, including the problem of misuse of financial globalization and the necessity to diversify the mechanism of financial transactions. BRICS is quite concerned about the situation in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. However, taking into account that BRICS is getting bigger, more influential, and Brazil is a new president of BRICS this year, with its priorities, including climate and other related issues. BRICS is still not capable enough to impose new rules of the game. BRICS is a club. BRICS is a kind of a informal group. It doesn't have institutions. and it is composed of countries with which interests are at some points are in contradiction with each other. I mean, like countries like China and India, for instance, right? Or countries which have quite distant agendas, like, for instance, Brazil and South Africa. Right? These are the regional powers, but they have their own regional interests, which are not overlapping to the extent necessary for a greater action. Right? So BRICS is better than nothing. But the problem is how to make BRICS and its declarations actionable. What should be done? Should BRICS be more institutionalized? Should BRICS become another UN? Or should it remain a flexible, informal club when the BRICS agenda would generate some new interactions between countries inside BRICS? So the question is still open. And one other issue, by the way, is that each and every BRICS member has its own relations with the United States. China has an extensive trade with the US. India is in huge economic relations with the US. Brazil has extensive relations with the US. Even Russia, prior to the special military operation in Ukraine, used to have quite extensive relations with the European Union. It had been number one trade partner, but in case of US, the trade was much less, but it was around $10 billion, but it was comparable to our trade with India, right? So this means that this global majority is not necessarily in opposition to the West. In many occasions, the West is essential for particular countries. They cannot just get rid of it. And they do not perceive the relations with the US as in colonial terms or neo-colonial terms. Yes, the inequality exists, and at some point they are forced to meet the US expectations, but they are okay with this, more or less, to the extent possible. Right? The bigger the country is, the power is, the more proactive policy it can afford in relations with the US. But smaller countries are, of course, much more dependent and much more vulnerable in relations with the US, which still remains a superpower, not just in military sense, but in technological sphere as well.
My last question to you, Professor, is what do you think, how you see the future? Do you think that we will have a more reasonable treatment of these sanctions laws and practices, or they just getting increase and get more and more frequently in our lives and in the country lives?
Well, it depends what future would we mean. In the short and even mid-term perspective, I would say that the US will not lose its leverage in international finance and international trade. Washington will still be able to use its supremacy in a number of domains of international economy to achieve its political goals in one way or another, or at least to inflict damage to its opponents. At the same time, if you look in the short run, in the foreseeable future, we may even witness another way of re-dollarization of economy, not just de-dollarization, but re-dollarization, due to the problems of euro and due to the cautious policy of Chinese central bank in terms of internationalization of yuan. But in the longer term, the national security interests of great power will drive them to diversify their international finance. And the bigger the country is, the more capable will it be to do this. Russia is very active in this regard. Russia is a great power, but and in terms of economy, it's among 10 biggest economies, right? The control over some critical technologies. So it's the size of economy is incomparable with the American one or with Chinese one, but still it's capable to do some things of its own. And Russia did a lot to get rid of the dependency on, for instance, on SWIFT. All internal Russian transactions are based on our own system of messaging, financial messaging. We have our own. China is cautious, but it's increasingly active to use its own system of payments, which has a function of messaging. So again, they have a partnership with SWIFT, for instance. They are working together, but at any moment, China may do it on its own. I'm not sure what policy of India would be, but it's pretty clear that the size of India's economy makes it possible for them to be to perform quite successful in this regard as well. It won't be beneficial for New Delhi at this point to spoil relations with the U.S. and to get too distant from the global financial system, US-like global financial system, but it has capabilities to do this. The question is it possible, is a consolidated action of these countries possible? BRICS officially and explicitly and implicitly has this as a part of an agenda. But what we see is rather bilateral format of the implementation of this task than the international one. So BRICS currency is a matter of a long future.
In the Arabics also have the EMI bridge as a payment system as well, right?
Yeah.
But okay, my last question, because you opened something that make me curious. You said that the tendency was not the dollarization of the economy, but re-dollarization of the economy because of the problems with China, the China Central Bank, and the other countries. Do you think that this tendency in the world is re-dollarization, not de-dollarization?
Well, now, yes.
Okay.
What bankers say is that re-dollarization is what they see. And euro could be an alternative for Russia, for instance. But Europeans are now in line of Euro-Atlantic, of Atlantic agenda, and this makes this provides political constraints for euro. So in this sense, the volume and the share of dollars in the national reserves may decrease. It may be replaced to some extent by gold, for instance, or by some, let's say, conservative assets. But I don't see a real perspective in the near future to replace dollar as a, let's say, as a global currency, or at least as significant alternative. I may be mistaken. I might be mistaken, but we'll see.
See. Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Obrigado.
Obrigado. Thank you so much. Bem, amigos do Elemento, então, essa foi a entrevista com o nosso professor Ivan. Espero que vocês tenham gostado, mas atenção, não acabou, temos mais uma surpresa para você, ainda aqui em Moscou, para falar de geoeconomia.